And I warmly welcome Helene Bukowski to the Hyderabad Literary Festival. She has done her rounds, in fact, of a couple of cities. She's been in Delhi, in Jaipur, and in Chennai, and now she's here with us. And then she moves outward towards Maharashtra, and then onward back home. Is that right?
Yes. Thank you for having me. Such an honor.
Thank you so much. Helene is not even 3 decades old, with 2 books to her credit, both of them award-winning, and has been registered for awards and been nominated. And she is a student who's just completed her master's, in fact.
3 years ago, so...
Oh, everything. Okay, well, that's still quite recent.
Okay.
So, somebody in the field of creative writing, in teaching, doing workshops on writing, she is, been focusing on translations. In fact, I will come to that. This particular book, Milk Teeth, and I advise anyone who would like to enter, if not already, into German literature, while it is very contemporary German literature, to pick up this book. An incredible read, and we'll come to that as we go along. This is her maiden book, Milk Teeth, Milchzähne, a novel. And I'd like to begin, Helene, by asking you, Indians know Goethe, and they know Schiller, and then they know Hermann Hesse and Günter Grass. And here comes Helene Bukowski. A very different writing style altogether, very sparse in your words and writing, and very intense in your imagery. So tell us, how did a young German traverse the world and create a masterpiece like this?
So I think it all started with reading. I was reading when I was really small. I started reading and I loved reading and I kept reading. And I had a really good German teacher in school, in primary school. And she always encouraged us to write our own stories. And she said, I don't care about the spelling. I don't care how you write. Just write. And I think that was a really good start for me. And I started writing stories. And I think I couldn't stop. And then I figured out that you can study it in Germany. So there are 2 institutes in Hildesheim and Leipzig. I don't know if you've heard of the cities. And after I finished school, I started to study in creative writing because I didn't know what else to do. And there everybody was talking about writing a novel. And I always thought, okay, no, I'm more into short stories. I like the short form. And then also I find it a little bit, strange. Already in the first semester they're talking about writing a novel. But then we had this seminar and it was called Building a World. And I wrote 2 or 3 scenes, and there was a mother and a daughter, and the weather was really strange. And the class, they asked me, but it's not really a short story because we want to know more. So I kept writing, and I think that's how it all started with Milk Teeth.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit more about the Milk Teeth, because it is about milk teeth, it is about nature, it is about a strange world that is with the mother and daughter and of course other characters that come in. Is this an imaginary world? Is this the world that we're moving towards? What's happening?
Yeah, so a lot of people call it a dystopia, but I think for me it's not really dystopian because it's more like it's our world, but kind of shifted a little bit. So, and I don't know, I think, I think that's how I would describe it, but the milk teeth they were I had this title in my mind because if you think about milk teeth, it's very interesting first, because that's what I do. I think about childhood, but then I think more about milk teeth, and I find out, okay, it's very brutal. You lose your teeth, you know? And this brutalness I wanted to create the novel about, and also, the climate crisis and all that stuff. It came later. I think there's like two different types of writers. The one who already knew everything in the beginning. They start, they have this big plan in their head and know what's happening and every step. And I'm not like that. I'm just, while I write, I create the story. And it's often very frustrating because I don't know where I'm heading, but also quite a fun.
Yeah, it sounded like that. I mean, you brought in the milk teeth already very early on in the novel. Page 20-ish is where it is, and it continues till the end, till the very last pages. And since you talk about environment and you talk about dystopia, it is interesting, and I would like you to pick up the book and read. And I'm not going to give in too much because that's the joy of the book. You don't know what's happening. It's not a thriller, but it is definitely a very secretive writing. A writing where, you're given a little bit, and then we don't know what's happening. So that's a very, very, very different style of writing.
Yeah, I think that's more, for me, it's more interesting to write and also to read if you don't know everything, and because then you have to start thinking by yourself and to explore all the things, and that's the thing about it, I think.
Yeah, and since it's about not knowing where we're going, we are today here, or is it another world? The story really talks about a mother and her daughter. In fact, I didn't even know about the gender of this individual, and we'll come to that. And it is about being cut off for various reasons, and that's described, but being cut off. So you have a little island of sorts where there is a set of individuals and characters. And you talk about milk tea, which is act of nature, and then there is act of humanity. And nature is so very crucial to you. I mean, at death, at birth, at arrival of new characters, flowers, so well described. I know more about it's almost as if they were characters in your story.
Yes, and that's a very good summary because, I think that's what nature is. It's not just the decoration. It's a character, and we have to, worship it more, and we have to remind ourselves that there is a connection and that we embed it in nature. And so I think that was also my starting point because, I wanted to make nature this big character in this book because it is.
It is. The colors, the bright lipstick, and then the berry-colored lips, So you keep on. Are these allegories? Are they signifying? Because there are certain names that you use. I had to look them up, and I said, okay, what does this flower mean? Where does this tree name come from? Is this something that you work closely with?
Yes. So I grew up in Berlin. It's a city, but still on holidays I went a lot, in the countryside, and I spent all these weeks with other children walking through the forest and exploring lakes and doing fun stuff. And I think that's where my connections come from with nature. And I have also this quote in the beginning of the book. I thought it's really important for me and for the book. And it's from Joan Didion. Maybe you know her. She's a great writer, or was a great writer. And she says, don't you think sometimes people are formed by the landscape they grow up in? And I think it's such a nice quote, And I think it's not only that we form the landscape, but the landscape is forming us and has such an impact on us. For example, if you have a river next to your house, it's gonna shape you. And I think that's really interesting. And also the nice thing about humans that we are not this thing that is not really connected, but we have this quality to empathize with our surrounding and to feel what surrounds us and to let things through and do things with it. And yes, I think we have to remember this a lot more.
You talked about the quote and the way your book is formed. Is the two things that come up, and I'd like you to explain them because I find them very intriguing even now after having read, and I must say, Helene, that after reading the book has not left me. I have read it recently, 2-3 weeks ago, but it has not left me because there are elements of the quotes that you end a chapter with several lines of capitals, and there is a summary, a quotation, an observation, an impulse. Tell us a little bit about that.
So I had this crisis with this book where I was writing it. I didn't know how to do it really. I had a lot of scenes and I had, the atmosphere, but it was like there were pictures but just next to each other, so they weren't really connected. So I thought, okay, now I give this book a last chance, and I had the possibility to go to a house in the countryside where an old woman lives, and she offers this house to students, so I could go there and just write. So I said to all my friends, don't text me, don't Instagram me, don't just leave me alone. You can write me some letters if you want, but leave me alone. And then that's where I started really writing Milk Teas, I think. And what I also did, I read a lot, and I read Christa Wolf. It's a German author, and she wrote the book The City of Angels. And in the book there are little notes, and it was really interesting for me to see because the main character is an author too. So she writes and she puts these little notes in this book, and then I was okay. Maybe that's a good idea for me too, to make Skalde, the main character, also a writer. So she has this little. She starts to observe her surrounding and starts to write these little notes, and that's where the story then came alive because I had now her voice because I knew now that she was a writer. I hope I explained it right. And it's also, it's like I write. I also start with little notes and then I build the story around it. So, yeah.
Do you hide your little notes as Skalde did in the book?
No, I don't have to. Lucky Emma, I don't have. My mother is really nice, so I don't have to hide my little notes from her.
So the girl, the protagonist in the book, writes these little notes and the mother doesn't like it and she doesn't want her to see it. And then she finds little nooks and crooks and puts these notes, and that's happening all the time through the story. And then, of course, you revisit it at the end with the notes. But that's quite...
Yeah, because it's a report, so it's, she has these notes and then she leaves the place and then in the end she starts the writing with this little note. So the notes help her to remember what happened in this story, yeah.
Tell us a little bit about the territory. The territory is a very important part of, again, possibly a character, because that is a recurring and a very strong and intense current. Tell us a little bit more about that.
So it's just called the territory. You don't know where it is or what time it is. So that was very important for me because I think if you don't name it, then it's more open, so everybody can see something in it. And I decided all the people there, they just call it the territory. And they decided they were afraid from, they didn't want that anybody can get in this territory. So they decided to blow up the bridge. That was the only connection to the rest of the world or whatever. And I think, it's in the story, but it's also like a metaphor. So you could also think about Europe, kind of. I think Europe does the same, like building this, blowing up all their bridges so nobody can enter. And I think it's very dangerous if you do that, and I think it's also not the solution for problems. So I think that's where I did get the idea for this setting, and but also, Skalde, she and her mother, they don't have this good relationship, but she finds home in nature, so she really helps on this, even it gets warmer and warmer and warmer, and it's not really a place livable anymore, but still it's her home. So that's what I also thought a lot about while I wrote this book about, if you have a home and then the home changes a lot, or you have to leave the home, can you do it? How would you do it? How does it feel for you? So, yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because you do bring out the territory in more physical sense of the space, but you also have the metaphysical sense of the various elements. So they again are also part of your story. I mean, water, fire, each element comes in very intensely. And there is goodbyes, and there is hellos, and there is meeting, and there are apocalyptic events that happen. Isn't that a bit scary?
Yes, my mother always asked me, why are you writing such dark stories? But I think I'm just drawn to it, and I think it's also important, just to look at it, and it helps also me it helps me, because if I'm just there and because all the bad things happen, and if I keep writing, I can do something with it, so it's just not, that's, I think, so I think I have to look at the scary things,
And the spaces in between as well.
Of course, totally. Yeah, it's not just a dark book. So there is hope. I promise you that. Not much, but my editor actually said, while we were working on the book, he said there needs to be more hope. So I put a little bit more hope in it.
That you have done, and I still find it so incredible. It's a 220-page book, large print, so it can really be read by a fast reader, which I'm not quite fast. But each image, each flower, each tree, you visit and revisit it again. I'm just fascinated by the way you do it, in the sense, or you kind of bid your river goodbye, and then it's your river. So you feel that way about your space, about the nature, about the world?
Yes, totally. And I think, my grandmother showed me a lot of plants and explained me the names. So I think that's where all this knowledge about plants and stuff come from. And also, I read recently this book. It's called Braising Sweetgrass. Have you heard of it? I explained it shortly. It's the woman who wrote it is a biologist and also a Native American, and it's so interesting because she talks about nature in it, and how humans are also part of nature. And there's, for example, this example about sweetgrass. So women have the sweetgrass, and actually, the sweetgrass where the women have halved the sweetgrass grows better than the parts where nobody has halved the sweetgrass. So, humans have the power to do something good for nature, because if you put out the grass, more light is coming in. So, and I think we have to remind ourselves about that we're not just parasites. we can do something, and we can be there, and
and regenerate, which is wonderful. Yes. Would you like to read something for us, please?
Yes, that would be nice. So I don't start at the beginning. If you want to know what's about, then you have to buy it or read it by yourself. But I think that's okay. I walked through the forest. The pines stood in the last of the light. Time and time again I paused, tilted my head back, and looked up at the branches that cut up the sky with their rusty shapes. I oriented myself with the markings I had made an age ago. Crosses made in the bark with a knife. The resin made my fingers stick together. The scent stayed on my skin for days afterward. I reached a clearing, an almost circular zone. Up from the ground grew grasses bleached by the sun. I slowly went into the center where I had built branches into a den. It had been my first hiding place in the forest, far enough away from Edith that I could talk myself into believing that she didn't exist. Stooping over, I entered through the opening. I saw that the wooden crate that I'd hidden here had been moved. Beside it was a bed made of moss. It smelled differently too. Someone had been here. I opened the crate. Nothing was missing. I took out one of the cigarettes and lit it. When I turned around, standing in front of the entrance was a child. We looked at each other. It was wearing a t-shirt that went down to its knees. Its feet were in overlarge sneakers crusted with dirt. But the most remarkable thing was its hair, red as if ablaze. No one had hair that color in the territory. I stepped out of the den. The child backed away. "What are you doing here?" I asked, lowering the hand holding the burning cigarette. Without saying anything, the child walked past me, sat on the moss bed, and wrapped its arms around its knees. I crouched down in front of the den. "You can't stay here," I said. The child turned its head and furtively wipped its eyes. I stepped away from the entrance. It got up and came back outside. It looked around indecisively and fumbled with the hem of its t-shirt. I took a drag on my cigarette. The smoke was barely visible. With its shoulders hunched, the child went to the edge of the clearing. Once here, once there, it turned around and nodded. Only after it had disappeared among the trees did I understand that the nut wasn't meant for me. The child had bid farewell to the clearing just like I did every time I left. "Come back," I said, raising my voice. Nothing stirred. I called out again. The pines crackled in the wind. I stepped anxiously from one foot to the other. I was going to shoot out a third time when the child appeared again between the trees. It looked at me, waiting. I stepped out the cigarette and stuck the butt in the pocket of my raincoat. "Do you want to come with me?" I asked. The child threw a look back into the forest. The darkness already stood behind the trees. Above us, the sky was losing its color. "I live in a house not far from here. It's safer there," I said. The child leaned against the pine it was standing next to. I held out my hand. To my surprise, it stepped out from the trees. "Promised?" it asked. I nodded. The child took my hand. "This way, it's not far from here," I said. While we walked through the house, the child didn't let go of my hand once. If someone had stood in our way, I would have knocked them down without thinking twice. "You lost your mind," Edith said. She stood in the doorframe wearing her black rabbit fur coat. Her greasy hair hung in front of her face. The circles under her eyes were dark violet, like bruises. She hadn't got up from the sofa in weeks. "Where did it come from?" she asked, eyeballing the child which I had set on the kitchen table. "I found it in the forest." "How can that be?" I shrugged my shoulders. Edith stood next to me. "None of the others have hair like that," she said. "It can't be from here." "How did you make it in this territory?" she asked the child. As she didn't receive an answer, she turned back to me. "Can it speak?" I nodded. "What are you going to do now?" she asked. It has to eat something. And then? What do you mean? When are you taking it back? Back where? Back to the forest. There was a silence. I promise it that it can stay with us, I said. You did what? I promised it. You really have lost your mind. Anyone else would have done the same thing, I said. Edith twisted her mouth into a sneer. You don't really believe that, do you? She turned to the child and asked its name. Once again, she didn't receive an answer. And you're sure it can speak, she asked. Before, in the forest, I said, mices, said the child, pointing at itself. Edith shook her head. Sounds made up. I'm called Skalde, I said. I looked at Edith to prompt her. She cleared her throat and said her own name. Skalde Edith. My sister repeated. We nodded. The light over our heads flickered. I looked at the window. The darkness had swallowed the garden. The kitchen was reflected in the window pane. Edith and I, shoulder to shoulder, the child shielded by our bodies. We were standing very straight, like we weren't afraid. Thank you.
You know, Helene, as the book began, and you read a very, very essential portion where the child, the third character, another woman enters the play, the story. I did not know for a very long time, practically half of the book, who Skalde was, because the name of Skalde comes in only much later. So you're kind of making us believe that it could be any gender, presumably. And it just so happens that it is 3 women. But there are 3 women. So tell us a little bit about, because you can tell that there is interplay happening within the genders and between the genders. Tell us a little bit.
So in Germany, I don't know if it's like that in India, but in Germany in schools, the books we read are often written by men and man perspectives. And I didn't really realize while I was going to school. And also in university, there was also a lot of books just written by men. And then I realized, I think, and I thought, okay, but that's not my perspective. And I want also, add my perspective to it. And my perspective is a female perspective. So I always, in my stories, there are always women and a lot of women. I think there are a lot of men, books about men. So I think now we can just write about women only.
Totally, I agree.
And also in the books I read, a lot of the women, they were like not very complex, They were just the mother or just the lover or I don't know, or the sister maybe, but kind of boring. So what I'm also very into it is to write female characters that are complex and that have different layers. So for example, Edith, the mother, a lot of people come to me and approach me and say, okay, but she's such a bad mother. And I'm like, yeah, but she's not just a mother. She has her own story. She has her own trauma. And I think that's also what we have to acknowledge always, that people are not just one thing. They have their own history. So I think that's important in writing, to write these complex characters. And in this book, they are not really good men characters, but in my second book, I invented a character, and I think it's also important to have complex male characters, because they're not just aggressive and bad or, strong. Men can also be sensible and soft, and I think we have to create the stories to open up our world so that we feel encouraged to be like that and more to, not like the stereotype person. I hope I explain it.
You did, and you deal with it very, very with an ease, which is very nice. You do show the complexity between the mother and the daughter. When I find out that she is the daughter, halfway down the book, and that's when you realize, oh, it's nice to know that it's all right not to know the gender, because then it becomes more universal, and this could happen to a woman or a man. And I was pleased to read that a lot of the men you depicted the way you did, and not in the. But there was one male character who was a friend, and he came back, and he was a support, and
he reads a lot. So I think it's good if men read a lot. I think they're more better men then.
That was very clear. Yes, books form a very very important part of the story.
So there's no school because, everything is broken. So Skalda, she gets her knowledge in books. She reads a lot, and I think books are incredible. I think we can, it can change our perspective. We can jump into different characters. And I think if you read a lot, you empathize more with other people. And I think that's the key to be a good human, or I don't know, but yeah.
Yes, you do show that the mother Edith, who's engaged with books and is surrounded by books, and amongst many other things, books is as if an extension of herself.
For her, for the mother, it's also in I don't know the name, to leave the territory, because she's so held in it, she can't really leave it. So books are also, you can, I don't know the English word, I can't remember right now, but do you know, never mind, okay. Escape! Yes, thank you. The escape. So books can be an escape, and I think that's also an important thing. Okay, stop now.
That's right. Book can be an escape, and your book has been classified frequently as an eco-fiction. Escape, I don't think it is, because you're quite graphic about what it can be, and a very fine thing. And I do realize that the next set of writer and anchor are here. We're running a little late, but I do want to bring up one more issue with you. Very interesting when you say to fold up the forest and put it in my coat pocket. Do explain that and talk about the coat as well.
So I think it came, I thought about if I would have to leave Germany, for example, because there's war or something, it would be so hard for me because I just love pine forests, and I think I would have the feeling to take it with me. And so that's what I thought of Skalda doing. She tries to take something with it because, if you don't know if you're going to come back, you want to hold on to a thing. So, and I really understand the feeling, and I guess you all would agree that you want to take something when you leave home and when you have to leave home. So that's where it comes from, yeah.
And take the milk teeth with you as well.
Yes, too.
That's right. No, very beautiful book. Helene, hearty congratulations. As I say, not even 30 and 2 books. We look forward to more and more. The second book just came out a few months ago, in fact, and last year.
Yeah, and thank you for having me. So, I'm really into German literature, but I'm here I think for 10 days already, and it feels so nice to also meet all the people and also to have this Indian perspective on it. And thank you so much. I feel honored. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. In fact, if you stay back for the next one, it's also about childhood. And thank you, Helene, for being here. Thank you, Herr Grabherr, for having and giving us the opportunity to have Helene Bukowski with us. Thank you.